This week we're exploring the shapeshifting legacy of Age of the Primes Amalgamous Prime, and wow do I have plenty of wild surprises to share. I'll be showcasing unique ways to pose your figure, tons of alt modes, and one really unique amalgamation using Micronus Prime you won't want to miss. Plus, the rise of the shifters. All this and more, only at Heroic Nonsense. Let's go. Once in a while, a Transformer figure comes along that just makes you scratch your head and wonder, what were they thinking when they created this character? Well, that was my first impression of Amalgamous Prime when I first saw his recent Age of the Primes iteration. Truthfully, I pre-ordered him mainly for my kids and to complete the set of the 13 Primes. Now, having had a chance to explore the figure, character, and origins a bit more, it all kind of makes sense. From a strictly lore perspective, I really like Amalgamous' inclusion as part of the original 13 Primes. Essentially, he gave rise to a subgroup of Cybertronians called Shifters, who were able to take on any form, thereby tying those descendants of Amalgamous Prime to the rise of the Triple Changers, Weaponizers, and Modulators. I really like that kind of in-depth canon and world building, especially when it relates to the 13 Primes, since it sets a foundation for the existence of certain types and classes of Transformers. All this, and I haven't even gotten into the description of the toy, which I most definitely will in a few moments. I'll simply state here, this figure is not for everyone. However, for those who like Transformers a bit outside the box, this may just be the bot for you. Well, here he is, this almost Frankenstein monster type being with 4 arms, Ed 209 legs, a scythe, and the very iconic looking Shockwave styled head. To be honest, after having spent so many hours with him for this spotlight, I'm fairly used to this guy now, but yeah, I recognize how strange he looks as a Transformer. He's definitely not your run-of-the-mill bot design. Amalgamous reminds me at times of other big screen characters, mostly General Grievous with that hunched over posture and multiple arms. Aside from all that, I really like his color scheme and shades of gray and silver, punctuated by yellow highlights, and appreciate now his extremely unique design, especially within the context of the 13 Primes. I'd say the key word to describe Amalgamous Prime is versatility. He can not only take on various forms and modes, but auras as well, for lack of a better word. He can sometimes look old, sometimes scary, and other times playful. As we briefly touched upon, he has 4 arms with clamps for hands rather than fingers, which can all be removed and rearranged, as can his legs. Honestly, I'm not used to those 2 things near his shoulders. I guess they can be called floodlights, but those eyelash looking pieces jutting out from them feels like they could be eyes. He has a somewhat zigzaggy posture with his upper body hunched significantly over his torso, giving him a very eerie appearance, especially with his featureless face with single robotic eye. His backside is fairly uniform, minus a few spots here and there that have some gaps, with most of them blending into the design. I'm actually surprised at how well he balances, given how far forward his upper body pushes out, but definitely makes for some very interesting poses. He truly is an interesting bot though, and the more you look at his details, the more impressive he becomes. That hunched over back portion, for example, is quite cool with that almost Dinobot design. This image also starts showcasing how some of the different elements can be rearranged, with those lights now being placed sideways on the back. Or like they are here, pointed forward, forming almost claw-like shoulder pads. I prefer this version much more. If you want to get rid of that eyelash look, you can always keep those lights positioned upside down as well. For the most traditional looking version of this character, the 4 arms can be placed like this, which I actually really like, probably one of my favorite poses for him. As for posability, very easy to place him into different poses because of his large sized feet and fairly balanced proportions, as out there as they may be. Really great look of him walking here, especially if you place him with all his arms in a more humanoid position. Amalgamous can also be placed in a running position, which can look quite good, especially with all the ways you can position his arms. This spider pose is definitely my favorite, scythe in his outer hand and all. I was trying to create a pose of him crouching down here, but it resulted in this more sinister lurking look, which I absolutely love. Not sure what it is about this positioning, but it just looks so cool. Reminds me a bit here of that classic 80s toy Robotics. I feel he's also channeling the famous Shockwave comic book cover reproduced in one of the last versions released. You can have a bit of fun with the positioning of his scythe as well, like placing it over his shoulder to create a shoulder mounted laser. Or on his back as a nomadic wanderer with his trusty polearm at his side. This one reminds me a bit of a lance used in jousting, especially with that pointed edge which forms the bottom of the scythe. As it can also come apart at different points, you can create this multiple antenna array with the larger polearm forming one on the back and smaller gray one up front near his head. His artifact is of course the first transformation cog, which is really nicely detailed and actually fits into his head, with a tab on the backside forming his eye once inside the casing. Overall, a great innovative figure if you want something different, enjoy a bit of parts forming, and want a very unique Prime for your collection. Lots more coming up, including a ton of alt modes for Amalgamous Prime and a combination alt mode you won't see anywhere else. Now on to Amalgamous' vehicle mode, and what an alt mode this is. Definitely not your standard run-of-the-mill plane or car. Instead, we get a type of robotic walker, generally transformable like any other Transformers, though with his arms and legs and some other minor parts here and there that can be removed. However, you really don't need to remove them, so he's not actually a parts former per se. Good luck, however, trying to keep them on as you transform him. As far as his alt mode goes, as compared to the other primes, he's currently one of the only vehicles that doesn't fly or have wheels, making him stand out a bit from the rest. I'll showcase how he can be integrated into your alt mode collection though at the display and build section of this spotlight. As far as a walker goes, he actually looks pretty cool. Minus the hands being quite visible in his alt mode, he's quite a fun looking addition to the Transformers collection, blending in different styles of previous iterations of him, including from Transformers 1. Not sure whether the circular lights are meant to represent eyes, but like I said earlier, I consider them floodlights that can be removed and placed in different configurations throughout the figure. Ultimately, it's a unique design for Transformers with a pretty straightforward transformation. It really started growing on me, especially within the context of the Age of the Primes line. Because of his versatility, I'm sure there are tons of options for plain display, some of which I'll show in a few minutes, and one example I've added here, where he can pivot back onto his hind legs, creating a simplified cannon type configuration. In the end, he is one of the 13 primes, which does grant him a bit of flexibility when it comes to design. And between his bot mode and this alt mode, he really stands out as one of the most unique and adaptable bots of the set. Now here is where we start seeing how much more this figure has to offer, and where we enter the parts forming side of things, since his body can break apart into a number of different ways, resulting in a whole slew of new alt modes. With these two basically forming the two largest parts formed alt modes, with one being formed mostly by his limbs into a Cybertronian tank, and the other simply formed from his torso, which acts like a flying drone. They're generally the same size and play into the idea that Amalgamous can take on any shape. They definitely don't look like Earth mode alts, but I can easily see them fitting right in on Cybertron. You can also scale his alt modes down even more and get these two tiny vehicles, one that flies and the other that rolls. You can easily see that they're made from the arms, but to be honest, they're somewhat fun and very easy to combine. And when I say small, I mean it. Micromaster level small here. You can also split each of them apart, add in that light, and you get some drones, which I think is probably the most useful of these smaller modes. But here is where you really start seeing how far you can push your creativity in both bot and vehicle mode. And these are just some of the ideas I came up with, in this case converting the walker into a tread-based vehicle with some minor rearrangements of the limbs. This one reminds me of that robot from Short Circuit. I left Amalgamous' head tucked away as it is in his alt mode, but you can easily fold it back out and give this a head. Now this is the mode I am most proud of. Yes, it looks a bit chaotic, but it 100% works and allows you to combine Micronus Prime and Amalgamous Prime together into one beast of a vehicle. It definitely has a Junkion vibe to it, and it allows you to combine two of the primes into one mega vehicle that I feel makes the most traditional sense out of all options. You can even put Micronus Prime in his bot form back onto his Cybertronian bike to have him riding the whole thing. It's like some kind of mashup from hell, a trike with the back half having treads and the front having a wheel. I'm actually surprised at how well these two form this half-track Cybertronian motorcycle, and all it took was a bit of minor engineering on my part. And guess what? I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. Starting right here with the two pieces transformed exactly as they should be for this combined alt mode. For the part incorporating Micronus Prime's bike, you really only need to push out the arms / exhausts and rotate the hands slightly like I've done here. As for the back, it's basically a version of the first few ideas I showed, with the legs attaching to one of the two arm ports on each side, leaving the second one open. Make sure that the second free port is pointing out in this configuration to give them a 45-degree angle while placing the extra arms wherever you like. You can take some inspiration from mine, but it's really up to you. It's these front ports where the exhaust pipes of Micronus will connect to, right at the port that is formed by Micronus Prime's closed hands. And voila, your very own multi-prime Cybertronian half-track motorcycle. Let's get back into the main review now and see how Amalgamous scales with the rest of the primes and some other bots in our collection. I won't showcase all the primes individually here, but you can see that he is a decent sized bot that actually feels like it's quite a bit bigger than it is. It's interesting to see how he stacks up against Megatron and the Studio Series 86 line in general. I actually think they work fine together aesthetically. And surprisingly, or not, he looks the best with the Earthrise line, especially Astrotrain. Can anyone guess here why I decided to go with Astrotrain for a comparison? You'll find out in a bit. Since we're comparing primes, I figured you'd like to see all of their artifacts next to each other, including Amalgamous Prime's original transformation cog. As for vehicles, he's definitely in a class of his own. It's actually here where you see how big he scales next to some of the other bots. I feel it's mostly due to how bulky his upper body is when transformed, raised even higher by the 4 legs. He even looks intimidating next to Micronus here, and Micronus is one of the biggest primes and probably the biggest tank out there. The side view also gives us a pretty good perspective on his size, perhaps looking a bit smaller because of the angle, but still impressive. From this perspective, you can see how Micronus is still the master of all forms and size. They do actually look not too bad next to each other as Cybertronian instruments of destruction. Next to Onyx Prime though, well, this image doesn't need much explanation. But as the only 2 primes right now who have legs as part of their alt forms, they're not a bad pairing. And while I didn't think they'd all look good in their alt forms next to each other, I'm actually quite happy with this set so far. We'll see a lot more ideas using the primes in both modes in the display and build section. So while Amalgamous Prime isn't technically a parts former, I'm going to warn you that his pieces can fall off easily while you try to transform him. In some cases, I'm actually just going to take them off to begin with and deal with them later. And so the first thing we're going to do is actually take off his head. Next, we'll just open up his arms like I did and lift up his torso almost 180 degrees. You'll push this part in to his empty cavity in his chest. That's where his head's going to go back in. So let's just leave that for a moment. And you can push this part out from underneath because it's a little bit tight, at least on mine. And then we're just going to open up these 2 tabs like so. So we can lift this part up, which is going to hide away also into the cavity of his torso. And then you see this little part right here. You're going to lift it up, but don't push it all the way in because you are going to need it towards the end. Now, what I like to do is just put the head back in, since we're not really going to touch this part again. Once it's tabbed in, just push it as far as it goes inside, and you can pretty much forget about it. Now we'll just swivel at the hips 180 degrees, and then you have to fold in this part. Now here's where it gets a little bit tricky. You've got to rotate the legs back and fold back the legs. So you kind of do it together. So rotate the legs and then fold that foot back. And then what we're going to do is push the whole thing right up like I'm doing here. My guy's really tight, so it takes a little bit of effort. And then you see there's a tab right here. You're just going to push it into the tabs that we opened up before. We're going to do the same thing here. And you see that tab. We're just going to push it right in. You can leave these legs a little open like that because we're going to need them open in a bit. As for the legs, you see this tab right here. It fits in right there into that tab that we folded down before, and there it goes, fell off. You can see right here the tab, you just gotta line it up. Might as well put the leg back in, but you really don't need to right now. And then we'll do the same on the other side. So open up the legs if they're not already opened, and swivel this down so that you can tab the back leg into that flap. You can open up the front legs if you want. I leave them straight for now. And that's pretty much the transformation. You're going to take this scythe now. Usually it's open, so I'm just going to open and close it like I just did. You see that tab? So that part from before, which I said leave out a bit, you're going to use it now to tab in the weapon. And then the back part is going to fit in a little space in the feet that once you close up, it's nice and tight. You kind of straighten it out if you can. And that's it, he's transformed. Alright, let's jump right back into the highly versatile Amalgamous Prime review and see what displays and builds we can come up with. Let's start slow with, let's face it, the likely display we'll all go with, as how can you not want to display the 13 primes together? And they do really look quite nice next to each other in their bot modes. Even with Onyx Prime in the mix, Amalgamous definitely stands out as being the most unique looking. We'll soon be getting a few more primes, and we still have to open up our Quintus Prime one, but this group of primes is already quite impressive. Right now, this is how we have our primes displayed, the Pantheon of the 13. Not sure how much more room I have to keep expanding this out though. If you do want to make it a bit more interesting, there are a number of ways you can do this. Here, I simply place Studio Series 86 Megatron on his knees, having just acquired, or better yet, taken, the Requiem Blaster that was displayed with the Pantheon. These next few though are a lot of fun, playing off of the idea of Transformers 1, the Dead Primes, and Orion and D16 visiting the Hall of Primes, both leaving with a new sense of purpose, which will ultimately lead them down two very different paths. In another alternate universe storyline, I imagine Orion Pax and D16 meeting a fully functioning Amalgamous Prime who offers them his transformation cog, bestowing upon them the ability to finally transform. Or alternatively, they find the remnants of the primes destroyed by Sentinel Prime. You can easily replace these two with your mainline Orion Pax and minor Megatron figures, or even some others like Nova Prime and Senator Shockwave and Ratbat. If you guys are interested in seeing some further display ideas like those I suggested above, or others I have in mind, or even some different alt modes for Amalgamous Prime, let me know and I can put a follow-up video together. For now, let's see how these guys look all transformed and on the move. I don't think we'll ever really display them this way, but it's fun to at least play around with them like this in their alt modes. You can expand this out to all your primes, but I thought these 5 looked the best together. And for the more beast-like fans among you, you can always put Onyx and Amalgamous together on the prowl, similar to how I had them stocking the cybernetic jungle together at the start. Not a bad display having them all transformed, but it does take up a lot of space, so likely not the way to go, especially for the 13 primes. However, I do like these 3 together. I feel they'd make for an interesting unit of primes. Reminds me a bit of a med unit, but I know that isn't in the lore. We can't forget about Micronus Prime now, especially since he forms such a big part of that combined half-track motorcycle I came up with earlier. I believe there's even some canon where they paired up together with Liege Maximo and went off down their own path for a bit. Remember earlier when I said that these smaller alt forms reminded me of the Micromasters? Well, here's how they look together and they seem to fit right in. I could have used the more recent versions of the Micromasters recently released, which we have, but I felt like showcasing my original ones that we still have in our collection. I think I actually prefer these versions, to be honest. As we start getting to the end of this section and spotlight, I had to show you how he looks next to Shockwave himself. I don't believe there is much tying them together, but wow do they look good paired up. But before we go, I'm going to build out the lore here a bit with this idea, basing this display off of the shifters, the descendants of Amalgamous Prime. And while I'm not 100% sure that the shifters included the triple changers, though there is some indication that they did, this makes for a perfect creative display idea, giving the triple changers an origin story. As for why Shockwave is still included in the mix, well, I like to think that Amalgamous' ability to essentially mutate into any form also gave rise to mass displacement, the ability for certain transformers to change size when transformed. It doesn't end there though, because we also have the weaponizers and modulators who can also pull apart like Amalgamous and reform into a variety of configurations. We have a few more in our collection, but I just pulled these 3 out for this spotlight. If you want to incorporate them into your displays using Amalgamous Prime, then this is a totally cool way to use this group. Here I imagine Amalgamous granting these bots the ability to transform like him, or even simply blessing them with the light of Primus. Each of his arms outstretched to a different bot, reaching for their heads as these bots await Amalgamous' favor. While not really a display idea, I figured I'd throw in one more combined form, this time using Power Dasher Aragon to give Amalgamous some added power. Not exactly sure what I'd call this, but it's something, and it adds on to his chest portion, which was basically left over from the other combined form of his limbs. I even found a way to use Aragon's wheels, which actually tap perfectly into Amalgamous and give him some much needed mobility. Again, this is just a taste of what you can do with Amalgamous and some of these other similarly built Transformers, so if you want a part 2 with a bunch of more developed ideas and builds, let me know in the comments section. I have a ton I didn't get to showcase this time around. So we get a bonus transformation video here focusing on all his extra all modes. And the first thing we have to do is take everything apart. So we're going to grab these lights, the legs, we're just going to pull them off. Going to do the same to the back. And take off his legs, his actual real legs, and that scythe. So now you're left with this piece, which is basically its own kind of thing. I'm not really sure it's even meant to be anything, but I use it as kind of like a flying pod. So now we're going to grab these two arms with a little bit of wings on the side. We're going to tab them together like this. Keep the wings open, and you have a little Cybertronian jet. We'll do the same with the other two arms, and we're just going to push this part of the arm up. It creates like a little kind of window, and these wheels turn. And it says to flip one of the hands upside down, and then you get this little vehicle that actually rolls. Kind of fun little things to play around with. Now, if we want to make those flying drones or that other drone, you just lower those pieces down, turn the hands around, grab one of the lights, and then you just tab the arms in. You have this kind of tank, mini tank looking drone. And we'll do the same with this little mini jet. Pull it apart, put in the light or the eye, whatever you want to call it. Click it all back together, and you have this flying drone. Now we'll grab the leg, and we'll start by pushing this piece all the way in. Grab the other leg slash foot, push it in. And then we'll grab this scythe or pole arm. See this part right here? It's going to tab right into the side. Make sure you set up the tank treads on the right side. So you just got to push it in. Make it straight. And then we'll do the same on this side. It all tabs together nice and tight. So you got a little mini tank right there. And you basically have 4 little mini bots that you can play around with, but you can combine it even further. So take the arms, pull them apart again, tab them back together without the light. And you see this part right here, it's going to tab right into the top of the scythe. And then we'll grab these arms. And we'll just tab them in right here. That's one. Here's the other. And you have this nice little Cybertronian tank now. As for the box art, all I have to say is, what a strange way to pack him. I know it's because of his shape when fully put together, but if I was a kid and saw this on the shelf, I'd be petrified and confused. Aside from that, I do love the art here. Great style of art, but also totally reminds me of some of the Marvel cards I used to collect back in the 90s. Something about that look. Anyone else get that feeling? Close-up of Amalgamous here, focusing on his head and completely conveying that hunched over look. Quite creepy. The back design is fairly straightforward. I do like the way they showcase the artifacts though. And finally, the other side panel, which I typically don't say much about. However, in this case, I just noticed how the art they use for Amalgamous Prime has a slightly different design and head from the actual figure. It must have been created before the final design of the toy was locked in. So that brings us to the end of this week's in-depth look at one of the most interesting and wild Transformers out there, at least in our collection. Hope you enjoyed this take on Amalgamous Prime and everything he has to offer. And if you enjoyed this episode, please consider subscribing so we can continue growing this amazing community. Thanks for watching, and remember, it's all such heroic nonsense in the end.
Transform!